Hello and welcome to Subculture, the podcast. I'm Dave G, and joining me today is
Harley W.
And today we're going to be taking a look at some of the news that's been breaking over the last week or so in the pop culture world. We're also going to be, of course, taking a look at what program we would like to bring back and how we would bring it back. And, of course, the worldwide popular segment, What Have We Been Watching? But let's kick it off with the news of the day. First of all, here in Australia, we're starting to see things open back up a little bit when it comes to theatre and things like that. Drive-in theatres opened up this week. I've been along a couple of times. So, Harley, I got to ask, what do you think about drive-in theatres making a huge comeback due to this COVID pandemic?
I think it's bleeding awesome. I've been dying to go to the cinema for months because I just missed out on going before it went into lockdown. So I've been hanging out for ages thinking, I could get off the bus tonight and just go into the cinema. Oh, no, I can't. So this is brilliant news.
Yeah, cinema was kind of creepy the last couple of weeks before the lockdown because there was kind of that thing for people who are listening overseas here in Australia where there was a little bit of a will they, won't they kind of fortnight with whether we didn't know whether the government was going to close things down. So movies like Bloodshot with Vin Diesel and The Current War with Benedict Cumberbatch actually came out in that 2-week period. I saw Bloodshot in a cinema with one other guy, and that was it. That was opening night of a Vin Diesel action film, 2 people in the cinema. And a week later, I went to see The Current War, and that was the day before cinemas closed down. It was literally when I was in the cinema, 5 hours later, the cinema closed down. I was the only person in the cinema on that night to see that film. Again, a Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Holland, and Michael Shannon movie, and there was one person in the cinema. And even the distributors wasn't sure what was happening. Neither of those movies had media screenings because they were kind of looking at the fact at that time of if you hold an event and someone gets COVID, are you going to get sued? So they didn't hold any premieres. That seems to be opening up a little bit now, though. We actually got our first invite to a media screening this week. It's in 2 weeks' time. So it looks like that is starting to lift as well. It also looks in Australia that within 3 weeks' time we'll be allowed to have up to 10,000 people in a venue as long as they're 4 meters apart, which should mean that cinemas open. But as we talked about in the last episode, how do you open cinemas when there's no real new material coming out? Which leads us to our second story, because last night it was announced in Variety magazine and then backed up by the distributors that Christopher Nolan's Tenet has been pushed back by 2 weeks, so won't be out until August now. Wonder Woman 1984 has been pushed back by 2 months, so won't be hitting cinemas now until October. So I guess what I wanted to ask was, this is all because the US is not recovering from COVID the same way as what the rest of the world is, and they've got their own other problems as well. Should we open movies in other territories when they can't open in the US?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, at least the cinemas will get their money coming in, the studios and everything will be able to say, okay, not the whole year as a complete write-off. If it's coming from overseas, it's still, good for them. And, us being in Australia means we used to get things 2 years later than everyone else.
Yep.
Once upon a time. So I think it's okay for America to be okay, you can have it a few months later than us for a change.
Yeah.
Does it actually matter? It's not the whole world, it's just one country. So, it may not be just one country, but seriously, it seems like it would be better business sense for them to start releasing where they can.
Yeah, and like we talked about in the last episode too, some countries have warmed to streaming a lot more than other countries. And a lot of people have kind of raised the point that with Trolls World Tour, it did make $100 million from streaming, but a lot of that did come from America. So could you at the moment, and this is something that's been talked about with Milan, open up Milan in the cinemas in Europe, Australia, and Asia. Asia being the key market there, I think, for Milan, because that's the market where the movie is going to make a lot of money, and then just release it on as a streaming movie in America.
Possibly, but then that raises that kind of argument that we spoke about in the last episode of the American cinema chains. Are they going to be massively affected by this, and is that going to ruin business for them? I think there has to be some kind of in-between or something. I don't know, all the social distancing and stuff, I'm sure you can still do that in the cinema. I mean, here they're already talking about, every second seat is taped over, so you can't sit that close to someone unless you're in there together or whatever. So I don't see why everything should be a total write-off. Otherwise, it is just release it in the biggest way you can, and then go elsewhere later.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting then that would be the model for when things reopen. I was meaning that I have Milan as a Disney Plus movie in America because at the moment the cinemas aren't open. So as soon as the cinemas reopen, to go back to the old format of streaming, can't have a movie until a couple of weeks after cinemas. But as a way to get these...
another issue though, because if you remember, back in 2001, the world started going to war again, and it was a case of, we're going to have to put petrol prices up until we liberate the other countries. Have petrol prices come down? No.
Yeah.
So I think the danger is that if we stop giving our big releases to the cinema, maybe we won't use cinemas anymore. So I can see an argument there.
Yeah, because it is a weird kind of thing at the moment, because I looked up these stats before we came on air to make sure that I was right. So a country like New Zealand, they've had 0 cases of COVID now for 2 weeks. Thailand has had 0 cases of COVID for 2 weeks. Cinemas are reopened in Thailand with 3 seats between each person and no food or drink being sold. So I think Europe, most of the cinemas in Europe are reopening. So Asia, the same. A lot of the cinemas across Asia are reopening. The only country that seems to be holding us back at the moment are America and Brazil. Brazil, of course, things aren't going to go back to normal there for a long time. I think we can be safe to say, because the government's not taking action to stop it. But America, they still had 19,000 new COVID cases yesterday. So is it really fair that the rest of the world's being held back from things that we love because one country can't get its crap together?
Yeah, are they not doing their Clorox treatment or whatever it was?
But yeah, I think that's where the argument's coming from now. But there's this conception that you can't have Wonder Woman come out until the American market's reopened because they need to do the big premiere. And it's but things are really changing. I spent yesterday afternoon watching Amy Lee from Evanescence do a concert live from her lounge room. Other art forms have kind of have found other ways around it. If you look at the Subculture website, we had an interview up a couple of weeks ago with some guys from the Royal Australian Shakespeare Company who did a performance online. You had the guys from Witch Skull, a band, do a performance that had 10 people live, I think it was, and the rest of the people online. It's the only art form that feels like it's not really moving is movies in America. Here in Australia, Monster Pictures are doing a special screening of 2 horror movies at the Yatala Drive-In in Queensland. We've got drive-in theatres back open. It really does feel like this is the one time for me as a movie fan, I've really felt that America dictates everything when it comes to movies.
Yeah, it does seem a lot like that. And I know, you've got all your wonderful Hollywood big bucks and everything, but seriously, you don't have to pander to that. I mean, the whole world creates great cinema. Why are we just following one tiny part of it?
Yeah, and when you actually have a look at the global box office, it's really funny. If you talk to someone in America, they love to say, oh, well, America's the biggest box office market in the world. That's actually not true anymore. Asia is actually the biggest market these days. When you look at how much money movies like the Marvel franchise and stuff have made, a lot of that money comes from Asia. And it almost feels like America's trying to hold on to that. Oh no, we're the most important market in the world, but it's actually moved on a little bit.
They don't want to admit that maybe China's doing some stuff better than America.
Yeah, but even just with the box office, like, it was really interesting, and I noticed that some of the distribution companies have started to cotton onto that, because with The Fast and the Furious, they announced that was being postponed before COVID even hit America. That was postponed because they said that they wouldn't be able to have the money coming in from the Asian market, which meant that, to me, that was basically them saying, Universal saying that they recognize that Fast and Furious is a huge franchise in Asia and that they were going to miss out on that while the Asian cinemas were closed. The same with Bloodshot, Vin Diesel's movie as well. That kind of got pulled from the cinemas because they knew that it was going to make so much in Asia. And writing for a Thai publication and having spent time there, I can see why. Vin Diesel is massive in Thailand and across Asia. So the Fast and Furious new movie, part of that was actually shot in Thailand, and they said it was literally like the king was in town when he was there filming it. And they were going to have a huge launch for the movie in Thailand. So I think some chains are starting, or some distribution companies are starting to work out that Asian market is so important these days that they do kind of target releases towards what is actually happening in Asia. So maybe we will see a shift come about at the end of this. So I don't know, maybe we will.
Yes, hoping, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so moving on now to our next segment. What have we been watching? What have you been watching?
Oh, a few things. I've kind of gotten back into my Korean dramas. There's one on Netflix that's airing new episodes each week, and that's called Mystic Pop-Up Bar. That is about... there's a couple of things going on. There's a guy who cannot touch people, because when he does, they start telling him their innermost secrets and feelings and whatever's troubling them. At the same time, there's a couple of sort of beings from the afterlife, if that's what you want to call it, who are on a mission to save, I think it was like 10,000 or 100,000 souls, like to make them happy as punishment for crimes they committed when they were alive. And then the paths of these characters overlap and they realize they can help each other. So it's quite quirky, but it's very entertaining. I've been enjoying that, so it's still going, and I think a new episode is up, so I'm eager to watch that tonight. I also started watching another one from Korea that was called Blood, and it's about a vampire who's a doctor.
Ah.
And looking for revenge on whoever killed his parents. And so he's trying to figure out who it is, and he's kind of been led to this hospital, so he's gone to work in this hospital, and yeah, it's quite interesting from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, for me, I've been watching, and this was one I loved. I watched it over 2 days. That's how much I loved it. A series from Mexico called Control Z, or Control Z, depending on where you are in the world. this is great, especially if you like 13 Reasons Why, which we're going to talk about in a moment as well, because we've both been watching it. But it's basically about a girl called Sophia, played by Anna Valeria Berciel, and she is a student at an international high school in Mexico, and she's kind of an observer. She's a little bit of a loner, and as a result, she kind of sees everything that's going on around her, and then all of a sudden, one day at a school assembly, a student's secret is put up onto the big screen, and the principal and none of the teachers can stop it from happening. They're like hurriedly trying to stop the feed and everything, but they can't do it because a hacker has actually done it. And then Sophia tries to find out who has done this, because it's a pretty brutal secret that gets revealed. Let's just say that one of the... I suppose I can talk about it because in the pilot, one of the girls in the show has actually had a sex change, and she used to be a guy. And that secret is plastered all up on the big screen for the whole school to see. So Sophia decides that she's going to investigate it with a brand new student who's arrived at the school, and they find out that there is a hacker who is threatening students that if they don't do his bidding or what he wants them to do, he'll expose a secret to the entire school. So yeah, it's a pretty... I don't know how to describe this show. It is a lot like 13 Reasons Why. It's a little bit like Gossip, the movie with Joshua Jackson, from like the early 2000s as well, but it's
it almost sounds a little bit like Veronica Mars or something as well. Like...
Yeah. I say 13 Reasons Why because this show is pretty brutal. Like the way that some kids react to their secret or a secret that's revealed about somebody else and their reaction to that, it is pretty intense. Like it's billed as a teen drama, but it's rated MA. Because yeah, there's some pretty brutal scenes in there with how people react to different things, but I just found it a really, really gripping show. Like, it's one of those shows where I'd start to watch an episode thinking, oh, I'll go to bed after this episode, and it would finish on a cliffhanger, and I'd have to go back and actually watch the next episode. I know other people who, because it's only like eight half-hour episodes, they've watched it all in one day because they've been like so transfixed by it. But yeah, look, it's a brilliant little show, so if you don't mind watching a show that's in another language, then definitely check out Control Z. The other show that I know both of you and I have been watching, 13 Reasons Why. I went back and binge watched the last 3 episodes again before this one. So what were your thoughts on these latest episodes of 13 Reasons Why? And then I'll say what I thought too.
Yeah, look, I quite enjoyed it, but I do notice that when I watch this show, I have to kind of accept that I'm not going to be happy for a few days. It is quite intense. It seems like they really wanted all the main characters to be really like pushed to their limits at this point. So yeah, I know you kind of go in there thinking, all right, how much can happen at this one school? But I have to admit there is logic behind it all. This last season is probably, spread it a bit further than you'd expect to go. Well, probably the last 2 seasons actually have pushed it further than you expected would have gone. So it is pushing the boundaries a bit, but it did lead to some half-decent resolution, I suppose. I don't know, there was quite a lot of weird intensity going on, and a kind of a surprise ending for one character, which just came out of the blue in the last couple of episodes. Which was like, what the? Could you lead up to that a bit, maybe? But yeah, what about you?
Yeah, look, I completely loved seasons 1 and 2 of this show. I think I gave them 5 stars each when I reviewed them. I struggled a little bit with the latest seasons for a number of reasons. It really felt to me like there were new writers on board that, to me, kind of didn't capture what happened. Like, there was a real feeling with this show that once Hannah left, to me, that it kind of felt like it was lacking a little bit. Like, I never really warmed to Arnie as a character at all. And I think partly because it's almost like that thing they made fun of in Community where they had the whole episode where Jack Black was there. And it's like, God, what, you didn't notice this kid before? Like, and I know Arnie wasn't there previously, but it's that whole idea of suddenly trying to make you as an audience look at the show through a different character's eyes. And it kind of felt weird because she was...
It was weird how she just was suddenly there and had figured out a bunch of stuff. I was like,
yeah.
Oh, okay, because I found that jarring as well. And I'm like, was she there at the end of last season? Did I kind of miss her? Like,
and I actually think that it was kind of a little bit disrespectful to the main cast, because I thought you could easily have, if you were going to write Hannah out, which I think was the big mistake, I think they should have left her there as a ghost or an imaginary friend kind of thing. But you could easily have had the rest of the show just coming through Clay's eyes or just coming through Jessica's eyes. There was enough characters there that we had already warmed to kind of have made that work. And I know they probably felt like they needed that link there so that the two households or the two groups were kind of linked in a sense to keep things going. But I don't know, it didn't flow for me as much. And I kind of started to get to this point where I was thinking, you know what, I went to a pretty rough high school and a lot of people went through a lot of crap, but even this made their lives look rosy. Like, the amount of stuff that could happen to people. Like, I did like the whole storyline about what happened with Bryce, like, and how that was the follow-on, but it just felt like some things came into that last season that was just put in there to kind of hammer things home a little bit more about the kids. I really thought that they didn't, and I know it's probably because he's one of my favourite characters, but I thought the storyline around Zach was kind of forced in the last season. I would like to have seen, I guess, more of the things happening being more of the fallout from the whole Hannah Bryce storyline, rather than bringing in a whole bunch of other stuff and bringing in characters that nobody really cared about. I mean, can I talk about... I guess I can...
I'm not totally, opposed to it as much as you are. Like, I think Hannah kind of had to go when she did. Because we were only really seeing her through Clay's eyes, and then, season 2, kind of, you got to see more of who she was and how she interacted with everyone else. And that was where it kind of made sense she disappeared, because it's Clay who sees her as a ghost, and the person he suddenly realized she was didn't kind of fit with this idea he had, and it makes sense that she was kind of like put away. But I think what this season did well, it kind of put a resolution to that, where he finally accepted that, okay, the person I imagine isn't the real Hannah, but I can accept who she was now, and it's not as bad as I thought. I'm just being kind of a judgmental dick sometimes.
But what about the fact that the main antagonist and the person that can expose the secret in the last season is someone that had a one-night stand with Monty, has previously been bashed by Monty, so has seen that bad side to him, but, like, all of a sudden he's totally in love with him, even though it was just a one-night stand kind of thing. Like,
Well, I think, did that happen twice or something?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think there was kind of... The parallel about it that I liked. It was kind of the story starting all over again from someone else's point of view, but this time, you know, Clay and everyone are kind of seen as the bad guys, so it's someone kind of taking Clay's role to expose Clay, kind of thing.
Yeah, I
thought was an interesting turnabout because it allows them to get another perspective on things, but it did have a few kind of issues about, was this guy really the love of your life? You hooked up twice and he beat the crap out of once, like.
Look, I just thought that you could have done that same storyline, but have it that one of the cops doesn't believe it, or one of the other jocks that was really good friends with Monty didn't believe it and was digging kind of thing. I mean, at least they didn't do, I guess, the Days of Our Lives thing where suddenly Bryce had a long-lost brother, like, turn up from Europe or something. But I just thought that they could have maybe done that with, like, one of the other characters that was close to Bryce and Monty not believing it, or something like that. Like, it felt like...
I don't... Well, you had all the jocks.
Yeah.
Going in for that crap, and they seem to be well organised at antagonising people, but even then it seemed like they did more than you'd expect the jocks to do.
Yeah.
And what you said before, like, Arnie, I thought she was an interesting inclusion. It's like, yeah, she first appears and you're like, I don't recall her at all. But she seems to know stuff. But it made an interesting kind of insight from a whole new point of view. It's like someone who didn't see Bad Bryce. And so her kind of opinion is, one, you kind of don't want to hear because, like, you know he did this horrible thing. But she hasn't seen that side of him. So she's kind of investigating. But I kind of liked in that previous season where she's kind of investigating, but she's kind of with them, and you never quite know, is she really with them, or is she going to expose them? Until you figure out she's the one that's, like, saving them all type thing.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I guess it was kind of important to have someone different and outside of it all at that point, and to have someone for Clay to turn to, because it had to be someone outside the group. But I guess that's what this season is about, that pushing the whole group dynamic, and, you know, will it fall apart, and what are the things that really count, and but there were a few curious things, like you said.
Yeah, and I think also it probably didn't kind of help that I just watched Outer Banks and Control Z on Netflix as well, where they did that teenage kind of stuff so well. Like, Outer Banks is kind of the same thing, where you've got these kids from the wrong side of the tracks that are wrapped up in a crime. One's being hunted by the police because his dad hasn't been seen for like over 12 months and they want to put him in foster care. The other one may or may not have killed someone at the start of the show. So I think because I'd watched those two shows and they did it so well, it kind of exposed the weaknesses in seasons 3 and 4 of 13 Reasons Why. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things that's almost kind of, it's like Game of Thrones to me, where I loved it early on, and then the later kind of seasons kind of disappointed me a little bit because it felt like the writing got a little bit lazy with the stuff that they did. Like, all that really kept me watching in the last couple of seasons was I still liked Clay as a character, and I was kind of interested to see, like, whether he would break. Like, I know that's kind of morbid.
Yeah,
but
his mental state in this last season is really interesting to follow, so yeah.
Yeah, but I loved Zach as a character, and I really liked Tyler as a character as well, and I wanted to see kind of what happened to them. But I even felt that they changed Jessica in a bad way in the last couple of seasons as well. Like, she became, like you mentioned before, she has a relationship in this last season that they explain why she's doing it, but then, yeah, it becomes something different. Like, it
gets a bit murky waters. Is it? Like, is she really doing it with an objective, or is she just kind of into him?
Yeah.
And if she is, it's like, it kind of feels like you're making a really bad choice here.
the same with Alex. They kind of, like, really changed Alex in the last season too. Like, it felt like they were kind of stuck with what do we do with Alex?
His kind of made sense to me because, you know, he'd already, you know, had an attempt at self-harm and stuff.
Yeah.
It's, you kind of get that push with him where it's like he goes to those really dark places, but then he kind of comes out. So I kind of understand his a bit. But yeah, it does kind of feel a bit like, oh, he has kind of gone there before. Are we doing the same thing?
Yeah.
And then, well, the two kind of relationships he gets into go a bit weird. Like, it almost feels like they wanted to set it up for him to go back to the first one by the end of the series. I'm like,
yeah.
Why? Like, yeah, there's a few weird relationship things in this one.
The interesting thing for me, I find, as a writer watching this show, is the first two seasons have shown me how I want to write, and the last two seasons have kind of taught me things don't put into your TV show, like, or make sure these things don't happen to your characters, kind of thing. It's, yeah, to me, I've learnt a lot watching this show as a writer, because I have learnt those things, like what works and what doesn't work, probably clearer than I have with other shows. Like, because I've found this year the shows that I've invested my time into with Netflix have actually been interesting, because Dare Me disappointed me. I expected Dare Me was going to be a show that I loved, and it just ended up completely disappointing me. Outer Banks, which I expected nothing from, and Control Z, both, I didn't expect anything from them. Loved them both. I've been really frustrated with Riverdale, like waiting a month between episodes.
Oh, tell me about it.
And stuff like that. And we'll probably look at that in the next couple of episodes. But yeah, 13 Reasons Why, I think I was keen to see what happened to my favourite characters, but I was a little bit disappointed at the same time. That's probably my summary of that.
Yeah, overall I wasn't utterly disappointed with how it rounded off. I think it worked for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were a few odd things that I'd probably look at again if I was, making the series, just to, is this making sense?
Alright, so moving on to our next segment now, we're going to take a look at, if we could bring a show back, what would we bring back, and how would we bring it back? So, my show that I picked for this week was Community. I recently sat down and watched every episode on Netflix, which was a little bit of an adventure in itself. But Community is one of those shows where I think it would really work to bring it back, and it's something that could actually be brought back, because like we've talked about before, they recently did a character read-through on Zoom while everybody was in lockdown, and when it concluded, the cast that were involved were basically like talking about the episode, and Dan Harmon, who was the creator, said, "Oh man, I missed this show. I wish you guys would agree to bringing it back." And the really funny bit was that like Joel McHale, Gillian Jacobs, Danny Pudi, Alison Brie, and Ken Jeong all said, "Well, we would." And even Donald Glover, who was there, said, "We would do it easily again tomorrow. Ball's kind of in your court." To which Dan Harmon said, "Ball's in my court. I might just take that up." So I guess what I wanted to look at is how I would bring Community back if I had to bring it back. And I have been thinking about this a lot over the last couple of weeks. You pretty much have a green light with Community with what you can do, because really the only cast member you can't bring back is Chevy Chase. I guess in the last few weeks, we've even seen more reasons why, as Donald Glover has talked about the things that went on behind the scenes, which was a lot worse than I think any of us fans of the show realized at the start what was going on. The characters that went out of the show, aside from Pierce, of course, who was killed in the show, you could easily bring back. Shirley, it was referenced all the time, was off looking after a relative.
No, he wasn't a relative. He was just an employer, I think.
Yeah. Troy,
wasn't he?
So Troy, there's also a little bit of a thing about it, because apparently if you look really closely in the last episode, there's a news headline that appears in one scene that suggests that Troy may have died. But of course, it wasn't ever referenced that was Troy, so you could easily bring Troy back. Or my way of bringing it back would be that like Troy was almost like a little bit of a Tom Hanks castaway, that he turns up after being like on an island for like 3 or 4 years kind of thing, just to kind of bring in that kind of funny thing. But the last episode kind of gave some ideas with what would happen, because Dan Harmon kind of had every character looking at kind of what Community could be in the future. And the one I really enjoyed was the one where they're all teachers at Greendale, which works because Jeff was already a teacher. You could have Abed going off to Hollywood and like maybe making a couple of shows that flopped or something and coming back to teach television. Annie could easily come back and teach like a criminology class or something like that. Ben Chang, easily, you could have him back at the school. Shirley could come back and teach like small business. Troy, if you did have him go off and go missing for Castaway, you could have him come back to complete his studies, or have him teach like survival, like as a class or something like that. There's so much they could still do with this show. You could almost make it like a teacher-based comedy. You could even have those characters that kind of drifted in and out, like Starburns and Leonard, still at school as students. Like there's a reference in the Frisbee episode that Leonard had been a student at Greendale for like 30 years. So why wouldn't he just continue on? You could have the Dean still there as the Dean, or as they had referenced in the thing, he gets demoted to become a teacher and Jeff is the Dean. There's so much I feel that you could still do with this show. Like, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for the past few years since it's been off the air, I've been putting together a pitch in my head for, okay, we at least need the movie, and I figure the movie had to be them somehow going out to find Troy.
Yeah.
You know, they find something that suggests, hey, he could be alive, so they have to set sail and go for Troy. So clearly that would be, you know, a misuse of a sailing class where they've actually obtained a boat. A Greendale boat, the SS Greendale or something. You know.
Well, they all passed. Didn't everybody but Jeff actually pass the sailing class?
The sailing one, yeah. So that's kind of like, but they've actually got a boat. But once they're at sea, you find out that the boat was actually given to them by that other city college that always is their rivalry. So the boat has probably been rigged to break down and drown them all or something like that. So, and this is where you can kind of have all those other characters, like you said, pop up in different situations. Like, you had that teacher who was kind of replaced the Chevy Chase character in season 5. He could pop up somewhere and be like a guiding light in some part of it. And, things like that. Just have all these little reference pop-ups, but the whole point is to bring Troy back into it. And then if you were to do a new series leading off that, they're all back. And, it follows the consequences. Are they all stuck at Greendale now, or is maybe Jeff turning into Chevy Chase because he hasn't left Greendale in all these years, and Yeah, he's like a new Pierce.
This is a very big if. If you were bringing it back, would you approach Chevy Chase and try and get him to work out his differences with the cast?
Well, I think that would be great. In the perfect world, I would love to see that he never actually died. It was kind of some stupid backstory thing about it. Like, I think it could be hilarious to find out why they thought he was dead but wasn't, or is he pretending to be dead? If it could be worked out with everyone, I think that would be fantastic. It would kind of be, I don't know, celebrating the heyday, if you said. But I also feel like in the show, his character had a bit of back and forth. It's like, you know, he does all this wrong stuff, then he's sort of getting better, and then, you know, they're cutting him out again, and so he does wrong stuff. Then it's like, oh, now we understand you, come back in, but then they cut him out again. It would just seem like this never-ending circle. I think there needed to be a bit more growth, so it stopped doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah. So relationship-wise, I actually sat down and thought about that as well. I think if I brought the show back, my relationship would be Jeff and Annie. I actually liked them as a couple more. Like, I was reading through some of the notes that Dan Harmon had written about the show, and he was saying that originally it was always supposed to be Jeff and Britta, but then when he saw the chemistry between Alison Brie and Joel McHale, he decided that Jeff and Annie was a more interesting kind of couple. I think that would actually work if, when it came back, they were married, like, as a really interesting, like, thing that you wouldn't expect from the show kind of thing, because if you had them as a married couple and they're almost like the mum and dad kind of character, like, to the other characters, I think you could kind of, like, tie in with some of the other comedy tropes that the show did make fun of, and make fun of, like, thinking of shows like, I'm trying to think of an example, like a show about a married couple, like Mad About You, those kinds of shows. Like, you could almost poke fun at those shows by having, like, Jeff and Annie kind of like as a married couple, and would also cause like a really weird dynamic almost with the rest of the friends as well. Like, because they're now at that point where they're like, well, yeah, Jeff and Annie are together. They're obviously like having sex because they're a couple kind of thing. So I think that would be interesting to throw in there as well.
Maybe that's the joke. Despite them being married and everything, Jeff can't quite hook up with her. It's just like, it somehow feels wrong, but this has been coming for years. Like, what the hell?
It would be interesting, actually, if the movie, like, okay, this is my writing brain going right over the top, but imagine if they just got married and they went for their honeymoon, and as they're on the plane going to their honeymoon to the tropical paradise, they see like an SOS or something on an island that something tells them that it can only come from Troy.
Yeah.
Like an in kind of thing, and that, like, so part of the comedy of the movie is these two trying to hook up but can't hook up at the same time while everyone's looking for Troy.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
and I think if it goes into a series after that, you have to have Abed, you know, coming back from Hollywood, but he's constantly being stalked by like a really famous actress.
Yeah.
But he's like not responding to her, whereas everyone else is like drooling over her. He's not responding to her, but this actress is like gone crazy for him and is stalking him everywhere, and that's why he had to leave Hollywood.
I would kind of love to see Abed like come back from Hollywood as a director who's like made a couple of like movies that are so artistic that most people don't understand them, but they've got like a secret kind of cult following.
Yeah.
Kind of thing where like these weird people show up that idolize Abed and think he's the greatest filmmaker of all time, but places like Rotten Tomato have given his films like 0% because most people don't understand his films. I think it would also be really funny if a lot of the stuff in his movies, like what we kind of saw happening with Community, were about his friends.
Yeah.
So, like, they've all watched these movies and realised that there's characters based on them.
He comes up with a movie where one of the characters is stranded on a desert island, and they realise, hang on, that's got to be Troy. What if this is coming true as well, you know?
Yeah. And I think one of the other things you could have too is, remember the movie when they were looking for funding for Greendale, and that producer came along and they shot like that really bad movie?
Yeah.
That I would love to see that, like, I would love to see that movie had become like a cult sensation as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, there's so much. The one thing I would hate to see with this show is, if I was Dan Harmon, I would not bring it back if I had to recast any of the roles.
Yeah, never recast any of those characters. Like, even if they just turn up on occasion for a cameo, that would be better than recasting them.
Yeah, because I know there was a lot of talk about that he should have recast Pierce.
No.
And no, Chevy Chase was Pierce. As it turns out, Offset too. But
Well, there's actually something interesting. You know how he was part of that cult?
Yeah.
And he said he's going to be turned into that, you know, liquid or whatever it was when he dies. I reckon that cult, you know, just gets really into Abed, and they want to make him their, like, Messiah type thing. And it just will parallel, like, Tom Cruise and Scientology.
Yeah, because the really funny thing about this is, I think the reason why we thought we'd never see it again is that everybody just assumed that some of the stars have become too big for the show. Like, I don't think they ever thought that Donald Glover would be saying that he wanted to come back. Ken Jeong even, like, they've all gone on to big things, but it was really surprising that when they did the thing on Zoom, they were the two that basically said, oh yeah, we would love to come back. Like, yeah, I know that a lot of people would say that's a kind of weird thing to say, considering that they did make, I think it was 2 seasons without Troy. But yeah, when you've got the big names saying that they want to come back, you could pretty easily see that the rest would want to come back too. Like, Joel McHale, I think would. Well, they all said on the thing that they would love to come back, but no one else is really doing anything ultra big that would prevent them from coming back.
Yeah, look, I think they realised it had such a big following, even when they sort of finished it off. You know, it was kind of clear that they were just finishing it off type thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's sort of become a wasted opportunity, but they did need, I think, to find better grounding than they had. Just they kept adding these new characters to quickly replace other ones, and I don't think they really thought it through from the aspect of longevity and how far can we take these characters. It was almost deliberate that they just put fillers in. Like, you didn't want to put the same sort of character to replace the previous one.
Yeah.
Because that would kind of be disrespectful. It's like recasting it. I just think they had a little trouble finding the right fit there.
Yeah. The one character I would love to have back in there that wasn't in the main cast but appeared a lot of times, I want to see Garrett come back. One of my favourite episodes was Garrett's wedding. That's still one of my favourite episodes of all time, and I would love to see Garrett, like, come back and be in that as well, like, being married to his cousin. Like, oh man,
this guy really knows how to marry his cousin.
I still laugh about that episode, even, like, just thinking back on it. But yeah, look, so I guess what we're saying is it would be a really easy show to bring back. Like, the one thing that prevents shows like Dawson's Creek coming back is you've always got that 1 or 2 actors that have gone on to bigger or better things and they don't want to do it anymore. But whereas with Community, it seems to be a show that the cast loved making. So they're all really keen to come back. You could even like maybe make shorter seasons so that people like Donald Glover can have their music career and their Star Wars career at the same time as doing Community. Like if you only did 8 or 12 episodes a year, then it's, only like 10 weeks out of their year when they can come and do it. So, yeah, it would work for me.
Yeah, even if, a few episodes had to have them do much smaller roles than you expect, that's fine. With an ensemble cast like that, there's always, a lead story which focuses on one or two characters. So it wouldn't affect things that much. If you had someone doing big films like Donald Glover, needed time away, he could kind of, in a batch, do his little appearances for each episode in one hit, and then when he has time, film his big parts.
Yeah, and I guess the other advantage with that too is Community is not like a show where there was a lot of location shots.
That's right.
So, a lot of it was in studio and outside at Greendale. So it was kind of very easy to film, and you would imagine that the episodes wouldn't have taken that long to film, aside from people being triggered by ad-lib lines and stuff like that and stuffing up, that you could easily shoot it on a pretty tight kind of schedule kind of thing. So you could possibly even go to Donald Glover at the start of the year and say, because he's a musician, that those tours and stuff like that are all worked out 2 years in advance. You could actually go to him and say, look, when do you have a 10-week gap in your schedule for us to come and do this?
Right
so
now, I think they should start filming right now because not much else is going on.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just gonna have a look. I don't know whether or not, and I guess nobody knows because Disney are waiting to see whether or not there'll be more Star Wars that he could be used in. But yeah,
are they going to do any more of those prequel type ones? Because he was just playing Lando, so I don't even see why they go back to that at this point. But
yeah, I mean, his other show Atlanta wrapped up, so he's not doing that anymore. He did the voice of Simba, of course, with The Lion King, which was just a movie. So he hasn't really got any TV shows or anything that he's kind of wrapped up in that would kind of stop him from doing anything else. He was in Spider-Man Homecoming. I suppose if they wanted to use him for anything for that, they could. But yeah, now's actually probably a really good time because he actually hasn't got anything on his in production or coming to production list at the moment. So yeah, now would probably be a really good time to bring him into and start filming some more stuff.
So Dan Harmon, if you're listening, here's a whole bunch of ideas for you. If you want a couple of guys to help you write it and put it together, maybe do some, background character roles, we can do that.
Yeah, and if you need an old guy to play Pierce, we know the perfect guy.
We know the perfect guy. He's going to kill us with this.
Well, I guess that's it for this episode of Subculture. So much been packed into this episode, but we can't wait for us two to get back together again and bring you another episode. But that's it for this episode of Subculture, the podcast. I've been Dave G.
And I've been Harley W, sometimes A to Z.
And we'll talk to you again very, very soon.